June 6th, 2016. June 6, 1944. CBS Radio, middle of the night. Everybody, fog of war. Reports from Europe, not confirmed. German radio reporting the invasion. London saying we're getting reports of the RAF active over the French coast. Warnings going out to the people of France to stay away from the coast anywhere between the Seine estuary and Cherbourg. But no confirmation until this. About 3:30 in the morning, New York time. About 8:30 in the morning, France and London, Eastern War time. The men are on the beach at this point. The battle is going very badly, especially at Omaha. However, here comes the Supreme Commander, the Allied Expeditionary Force, a man who will be twice elected President of the United States, and is famous today for having contained the Soviet monster in the 1950s, Dwight David Eisenhower. At this time, he was known as a staff general, and he's making an announcement as it will be set up on shortwave. This will be difficult to hear, but this is what all America heard at 3:30 in the morning. Certainly all of New York was awake. They heard the shortwave. You'll hear it if you're keen and listen closely.
Start at the coffee at 3:33 a.m. in the morning. That's 1 minute after we'd switched to London. And here's what it says. Flash. That's a very rare thing, you know, in the news world. Flash. London. Eisenhower's headquarters announces Allies land in France. Immediately afterwards, bulletin. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, June 6 AP. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's headquarters announced today that Allied troops began landing on the northern coast of France this morning, strongly supported by naval and air forces. The text of the communique, quote, under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces supported by strong air forces began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. In 5 seconds, I hear we again will get an official report from London. Go ahead, London.
This is Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. In a moment, you will hear the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. His statement will be followed by other messages to the peoples of the countries on the western coast of Europe, which are occupied by the enemy. The Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. People of Western Europe. A landing was made this morning on the coast of France by troops of the Allied Expeditionary Force. This landing is part of the concerted United Nations plan for the liberation of Europe, made in conjunction with our great Russian allies. I have this message for all of you. Although the initial assault may not have been made in your own country, the hour of your liberation is approaching. All patriots, men and women, young and old, have a part to play in the achievement of final victory.
Dwight David Eisenhower, becoming the 34th President of the United States, the first Republican since the 1930s to hold that post. And tonight we go to the reporting of 2016, when it is necessary to address ourselves immediately to the breaking news of the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party, Donald J. Trump, whose remarks these last days started a fire in the Republican Party. Tonight, there is not one Republican politician I can find in the news reporting of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, who will defend the remarks Trump has made repeatedly about a federal judge born in Indiana. I welcome my professionals tonight to comment on this because it is a breaking news story. It's moving very quickly. But this is also a political story. Trump is the presumptive nominee. There is a convention in Cleveland. The party is thrashing around right now how to deal with remarks that are unacceptable routinely. McConnell of the Senate, Ryan of the House, Ayotte of New Hampshire, Sass of Nebraska. Good heavens. Gingrich has very carefully backed away from Trump on this. And the New York Times is reporting tonight that Reince Priebus, chair of the Republican National Committee, is advised to make an intervention. That's the word used in the New York Times, intervention with the candidate. because of these remarks. My colleague and co-host, Thaddeus McCotter, WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes, our recovering politician. Thaddeus, you know the scale of this upset in the party tonight because of these remarks. Your family has Mexican-American connections, Thaddeus. We've heard routinely all day long denunciations of Trump's remarks. Does this strike you as business as usual in the Republican Party, or is something discontinuous here? Is this extraordinary? Good evening to you, Thaddeus.
Good evening to you, too, John. Well, obviously it is extraordinary. I mean, as McConnell and all the Republican establishment knows, is that the Republican Party is often painted with a broad brush as being insensitive, if not worse, to the concerns of minorities throughout the United States. It's one of the Democratic staple protests against our party. And so what happens is when you have somebody who actually comes along and says things that seem to reinforce that narrative, you're going to have very nervous, very upset, and very concerned, not only Republican establishment, but Republican electorate throughout the country. And when this individual is your nominee for the presidency of the United States, it exponentially exacerbates the panic and the problem.
David, Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, was a candidate himself and has, since the decision after Indiana, where Trump was the only man standing, looked to support Trump's campaign. Tonight is saying that every member of the Republican Party who has embraced Trump needs to disembrace, unembrace, back away because of these remarks until and if the apology, the retraction. David, is the party broken? Is that what we're hearing tonight? These remarks across the landscape. We've got a nominee, a presumptive nominee, who is being pushed away, who is being rejected by the party that wants to nominate him.
Yeah, it's really an interesting situation, John, because the party really doesn't have any power to do anything other than deny him the nomination, but they don't know for a fact that the voters writ large are yet looking at this situation the way they are. And they're in a tough spot because Trump, in theory, win or lose, can survive his shenanigans because he's famous, he's a celebrity, he's given a lot of deference by the voters to act differently, but this could leave a stain on Republicans long after Trump is gone, who hope to still, have power and win elections in a country that is growing less white every 4 years, more Hispanic, more Asian, and all sorts of things. And the truth is, Trump doesn't have any motivation to back down because every time a Republican denounces him, number one, they denounce him what he says, but then, of course, they're loyal to him because anything's better than Hillary Clinton. And number two, really, what can they do? I mean, they can remove their endorsement, but so what? I mean, Trump rode to the nomination with basically the party, not being able to stand him. Now, they didn't really do much about it because they didn't take him seriously until it was too late. But you're Donald Trump. What's your motivation to change? It worked for you. You're convinced it's going to keep working for you. You don't buy any of the, mainstream media claptrap. So they're just really in a tough spot.
Mr. Fun, a very good evening to you. On a conference call this afternoon reported by Bloomberg News, Trump was ordering his surrogates to attack journalists who ask about his remarks, to call the journalists racists. It's a peculiar response, John, to turn it around and accuse the other person of racist. Does this mean that we're in a new landscape here, different from the primary? Are we going to see combat at each Trump interview going forward?
Donald Trump is certainly giving a good impression in that conference call of being Captain Queeg of the Caine Mutiny. I think Republicans have to recognize that, leaving aside the moral and ethical questions, let's look at the pure political question. We are reaching a cost-benefit analysis in which more Republicans stay home because of Trump's shenanigans than are alienated from the party if he were to be denied the nomination. I think another 4 weeks of this, and that's almost guaranteed to be true. In that case, it is incumbent upon the delegates, rather than commit political suicide, to say to Donald Trump, we demand your tax returns. Every presidential candidate for 40 years has given them up. If you don't give them up, we're pretty convinced the IRS will leak them, as they did with Mitt Romney in 2012. We need your tax returns. Trump then has a choice. I don't think he'll give up his tax returns. At that point, the delegates should feel free to abstain, and they're legally allowed to do so. They can also take their alternates with them. We'll go to a second ballot, and we'll see how Donald Trump fares. I suspect not very well. I think the party has no good options here, but the best option is to prevent someone who is 70 years old, is incapable of learning, incapable of behaving, taking the party over the falls in November. We can't take 5 more months of this. Republicans can't take 5 more months of this. He is a doomed nominee. He can't change. He won't change. He's a 12-year-old emotionally. The party has to have an intervention, not just with the RNC chairman, but with the delegates.
Thaddeus, you have a question for our guests.
Yes, gentlemen. How far down the ballot is this already going? I mean, we see that there are Senate seats and House seats that the Democrats are putting into play because of this situation and other preceding problems. How bad is this absolutely shaping up to look for the Republicans if it continues on this course?
David?
Well, that's a really good question. I was talking to a lot of Republican insiders today and asking them that very question. And they're concerned about 2 things. Obviously, if this continues unabated, then you're just stained politically because people associate, Republicans down ticket with the nominee. But there's the other issue, and that's, and it's more subtle, but it's still problematic for every Republican that isn't Trump. And that is that, for the past couple of days, what Republicans wanted to be discussing was the lousy May jobs report and the Inspector General's report from the State Department that has Hillary Clinton's email scandal in full bloom. And they couldn't because Trump stepped all over it with, calling the Mexican judge, look at this, calling Judge Gonzalo Curiel, impartial and unfair simply because of his ethnic heritage. And so this is where Republicans are worried on both ends. And I think what's difficult here, and John makes a lot of good points, is Trump has a habit of doing something like he's doing, and then I'm not surprised, I won't be surprised at all if he sort of moderates his tone again for a couple of weeks or a month or what have you, and then he dives right in all over again. And so it's never so sustained that it creates a critical mass that allows them to do everything. It becomes a series of periodic one-offs that brings them to the brink. He pulls it back, and it allows him to keep going.
John?
Well, if that's the pattern, you might as well have the intervention now rather than later. Because let's look at the tax returns. The IRS will leak them in October. Nobody will be punished. Just ask Lois Lerner. The tax returns are going to be devastating. They'll come just before the election. Trump promised to release the tax returns. Now he's reneged on that promise. He has a pattern of not telling the truth. I think due diligence is required in business. It's required in contracts. It's required in personal relationships. It's time for the party to do its due diligence. Donald Trump can no longer be trusted on his own. We need the tax returns. And I don't think he can give them up. And if he doesn't give them up, the delegates should act accordingly.
June 6, 1944. June 6, 2016. You heard Dwight David Eisenhower. That's the President of the United States. Trump. I'm John Batchelor.